Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, what's up?
What's up? This was really fun. I really enjoyed talking with our guest, Rex Martin.
I'd never spoken to him before.
It was a really fun one, and kind of, I wouldn't say meandered, but I just found it really fun and interesting. You obviously studied with him and spent hours and hours with him, and I did. I shared a Falcone. We were both guests at a Falcone festival. I don't know, 5 years ago or something, and really hit it off, and it was really fun to get to know him then, and this was it was just a cool conversation. It kind of took my mind off all the things that are happening outside.
Yeah, we barely touched on it, actually, which was kind of, we did talk about the distance learning thing, but we ended up barely touching on the whole COVID-19 thing, which we didn't plan on not touching on it. We didn't plan on touching it. We just kind of...
I was kind of curious, actually. In retrospect, I was curious about what's going on in Switzerland. You know, how things are going in Europe, and but it didn't come up, which is probably a good sign in terms of my coping with all this. Yeah,
it's and we're recording this just a few days before things release here. So we recorded this on Saturday the 28th. Things are moving so fast that this comes out on Tuesday, and there will probably be three major developments, economic, public health wise. It's insane how fast this whole thing is moving, but it was really nice I commented at the very end. We also had a very long bonus episode where we got some good stories. Including me in a towel. That was fun. Him really not giving a shit about a predicament I was in, which was good back when I was his student. But yeah, great. And I realized that now we get to, he's so busy, and the time zone difference, and we had never tried to schedule it before, but he's a dear person to me and one of my mentors, and I learned so much from him. So he's been on like the shortest list possible of people I've wanted to interview since this thing started, and just hasn't happened. And
I'm glad you brought that up, because it just occurred to me, we passed our 5th year anniversary with not so much as even a, hey, congratulations. So, Andrew, congratulations.
Wait, let's just start
5 years and 1 month into it.
Let's just start all over again. Hello and welcome to the Brass Junkies. I am, happy 5th anniversary, Lance.
Happy 5th anniversary plus a month, Andrew.
There you go. It's almost like there was like a global pandemic for us to be worrying about.
February 19th.
Then I can't even blame it on that. Although it was on my radar by then. It just, wasn't on the radar of, anyone in charge. But anyway, moving right along. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Rex Martin. If you want to hear the bonus episode, which was almost half an hour long on this one, then you can go to patreon.com/thebrassjunkies. And other than that, thank you to everybody who, if you want to help the show, if you are stuck at home, if you're stuck at home with little kids and you have significantly less time than you ever did before, but some of you have more time, if you could do us a favor, go to iTunes, go to Apple Podcasts, go to wherever you consume the Brass Junkies. If you could take like 90 seconds to leave us a rating and maybe a review, it would be really, really helpful. It would mean a lot to us. So without further ado, let us get to the conversation that we had with Rex Martin. And today on the Brass Junkies, we are joined by one of the most influential people that I have ever had in my life. And
thanks, man.
That is my co-host, Lance LaDuke.
I really appreciate that. That is sweet of you.
We also are joined by someone who is not that consequential in my life, and that was my teacher from undergrad, Mr. Rex Martin. Rex, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks, Andrew.
Rex, I have to tell you right at the outset that I have heard your name come out of Andrew's mouth exponentially more times than either his wife or child combined.
In a good way as well?
Always in a good way, too.
I'm worried that he's going to...
shoulder twitch when you said it.
Yeah, right.
No.
I'm worried that there's going to be that he's going to be able to grade me again at some point. I have no idea how that scenario would possibly play out, but we'll have to see.
You were actually there in the days where we still had paper grades that we had to go deliver to the bursar's office.
Oh man, bursar.
The bursar's office. Some of my proudest moments at Northwestern was when I continually convinced Ben Denny to borrow money that was meant for tuition to go and buy fish tickets. He used to call the bursar's office his ATM machine. And we're still doing it. It's funny. Yeah, it's like we have more money now, but we're still borrowing money that should be going towards other things to see the same band. So anyway, tell us about your still relatively new life over in Switzerland. What are you up to these days?
Well, let me back up 3 years. I retired from my position at Northwestern. I think it was in 2017, and had been, I don't know if you knew this, but my wife is from Switzerland. And when she moved to Chicago so that we could get married over 30 years ago, I promised her that when we retired, we would move back to Switzerland. So I've been saving and thinking about it and planning it all these years, but never actually had a specific timeline. And then I guess 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, I was working at a brass festival in Karlskrona, Sweden, and met Ian Bousfield, who teaches trombone here. And the two of us hit it off like brothers. And he found out that I was a Swiss citizen and that I was eventually going to retire to Switzerland. And he got the ball rolling to create a position here in Bern for me. And so I retired from Northwestern. We moved here. I've been here now nearly 3 years. Been teaching here for 4 years, but for 1 year was going back and forth from Chicago to Switzerland every month. And so I'm teaching here about half-time, 50 or 60%, and just starting a few weeks ago was asked to join the faculty at the Royal Academy of Music in London. And it's a beautiful title. I mean, I'm kind of trying to collect as many academic titles as I can.
except doctor.
Yeah, no, what I really am missing is the best one. I'll tell you that after. I'll never get that one. But I'm now a professor of music emeritus at Northwestern. I'm a professor of music at the Bern University of the Arts. And now I am a distinguished international professor of brass at the Royal Academy of Music. But what I really wanted, even just for a day, was to be a dean.
Why? It's not like you have opinions.
No, I could go in with a martini glass,
Right.
and have what were the girls called? Behind the gold diggers.
Right.
The gold diggers behind Dean Martin.
Right.
And I could Dean Martin, even if just for a day.
I see.
Oh, I would have loved that.
You do know that distinguished is just a polite word for old, right?
But look, I'm actually seeing my face in this little tiny square on my computer, so I'm quite aware of the
Well, it might give you some solace to know that at Carnegie Mellon, the College of Fine Arts is headed up by a man named Dan Martin, we have our own Dean Martin, who has been quite a dean for the last, he's fantastic, actually. He's great. He's about to step down. So Dean Martin he is.
Wow, how about that?
No gold diggers from what I can tell, but
I need to tell a quick Rex Martin story from my time at Northwestern, where let's see, there are two that are popping into my mind. All right, the one that I'm going to tell, maybe I'll tell the other one on the bonus episode. The one that I'm going to tell is that this was my sophomore year when I had a 9 a.m. lesson, and at about like 9:03 a.m. I was awoken by the telephone, and I like leapt to my feet, and like my heart stopped because I looked at the clock, and then I knew exactly who it was. And then and I answered, trying not to sound groggy. And the reason I was still asleep was not because I had gone to bed at 10 o'clock, after staying hydrated and and getting eating well the day before. And anyway, I said hello, and then Mr. Martin said like, good morning, Andrew. Are you on your way? And obviously, I'm not on my way. There's no cell phones at this point. The telephone's attached to a wall, and you know which wall because of the number you dialed. And I was like, I'll be right there. And I basically got dressed in like less than 10 seconds. I sprinted out the door. I was about a 5-minute walk to the music building. I got to his office, including getting my tuba out of the basement, which involved walking all the way around the building. I was there in just under 5 minutes. I mean, I'd sprinted so fast that it felt like a battery had like exploded in my mouth. I didn't brush my teeth. I hadn't done anything. I'm standing there completely winded, and I knock on the door. And so it's like about 9:08 now, and I'm standing at the door, and Mr. Martin calmly opens the door, and he said, he says, he's so calm. He says, "Good morning, Andrew." He said, Have you had a chance to warm up yet this morning?" And he's not mad, which would have been easier. And he wasn't smiling. And I said, no, sir, I haven't. And he said, "I would respectfully submit that you would just be wasting both my time and yours. So have a great day." And then he just very calmly closed the door in my face. And then I just stood there. It was like he didn't say the D word. He didn't say he was disappointed in me, but it would have been easier if he had just yelled at me and just been like, "You dumbass," is like professional and blah, which would have been totally granted. But I just stood there, and then I had never felt smaller in my life. And that was I think the only, and for sure the last time that I showed up like even 2 seconds late. So that was the last tuba involved thing that I ever showed up late to in my entire life. So it worked, but that's one of my go-to Rex Martin stories.
Yeah, I've only got a couple of things that'll set me off, and one of them is somebody being late for something.
Yeah,
me having to wait for somebody.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that was a good one, though.
I don't like people to wait for me. I don't. Yeah. I mean, even aside from professional things, I was heading to an old student that was coming back to Evanston to visit, and so we arranged to meet at a restaurant. And I parked the car, and it was winter and snowing, and I'm thinking, "Oh shit, I'm running late." So I texted him, "Sorry, I'm running a little bit late." And then I show up, and we're supposed to meet like at 7 o'clock. And I walk in at 7:02. And a text.
Oh, goodness. I would love to hear you talk about your relationship with Arnold Jacobs, which I know has been talked about a lot, but I think it gets talked about a lot for good reasons because you guys were very close. And could you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Well, yeah. Well, we became close. I mean, we didn't start close. We started definitely with a teacher-student relationship. I had studied at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois, which Lance tells me has changed its name.
You're in the Hall of Fame. You should know.
He is in the Hall of Fame.
Not the first time it's changed its name. One of my sisters went to school there, and it was still called ISNU, Illinois State Normal University.
ISNU?
Illinois, yeah.
You know what? ISNU. You are? Wait, what? What'd you say?
Lance, ISNU. Could you try and... I'm trying to have a serious conversation here with my mentor.
Hey, man, he's laughing.
I'm sure. That's why I'm scolding you, because he's just going to keep encouraging you, and then this is going to be all fart jokes.
It's all over. Yeah.
So Ed Livingston was my teacher, and after a couple of years, he said, "Look, I've kind of run out of things to teach you. I think you should go up and take some lessons with Arnold Jacobs. It will help you professionally to break into the recording scene, the freelance scene in Chicago," which is really what my goal has been. And so he did something really special that normally, if someone wanted to take their first lesson with Mr. Jacobs, you'd call him on the phone. He would say, "I'm really busy right now. Call me, in about a month." And you do that, and it would take a long time before you finally would get a lesson because he was really busy. But Ed Livingston called him, and he was a friend and a former student of Mr. Jacobs. And so Ed Livingston said, Rex, you've got a lesson with Mr. Jacobs next Saturday. And I said, okay, great. $40 at the time. $40 I did not have. But I had a girlfriend at the time who was, actually, no, she wasn't working yet either. She was a student. Somehow we got the money together.
I'm not going to ask.
It didn't come from my bank account because I was playing in a jazz band every week for $7 every Thursday night. That was my income. But anyway, I went up, had a lesson, thinking really that I was pretty good and could play. You know, I was the best student that Mr. Livingston had ever had. And went up and had a lesson with Mr. Jacobs, and he just kept asking me to play and play some more and play some more. And I ended up playing quite a bit of really pretty virtuosic stuff. I was already a very advanced player by that point. And at the end of it all, he said, well, you have more technique than you'll ever need. You're one of the greatest tuba players I've ever heard. He's just going on. And I'm like getting puffed up more and more and more, like sitting up straight. You know, the ego is just oozing out of my ears. And after he goes on for a while, he says, but let's work on your tone. and I'm thinking, well, what's wrong with my tone? Like, you know, everybody says I got a nice sound. And partly in my ear, I'm thinking, yeah, I sound like a tuba. What else can you do other than a tuba? And he saw the confusion on my face. So he said, here, let me play your tuba, which now in this day and age, you know, sends me, you know, into fits of horror.
Right.
Thinking that someone would share an instrument now. But he took my instrument. He had really hard time seeing. And so he's jabbing his mouth into the lead pipe and into the bell. He's just like damaging my horn, trying to get his mouthpiece in there. He finally did, and he played 4 or 5 notes, just mid-range, lyrical, long notes. And then he saw the expression on my face change to, yes, let's work on my sound. So that's how it started. And then he gave me enough just detail requirements, really, professional requirements, just little detailed exercises to do that I didn't call him again for 4 or 5 months because I wanted to absolutely master these simple little things that he'd asked me to do. And when I was ready, I brought those in, and he asked me to play those. I played them for maybe 10 seconds, and he realized, okay, he's done the work, and we went on to the next thing. And it just kind of went that way, many months in between lessons. And by the 3rd lesson, I think, he said, I'd like you to move to Chicago and be in the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. And I really like you to come up and also substitute for me in the orchestra when you can. And I'm like 19 or 20 or so at that point. And so I auditioned for Civic, got in, and then went to Northwestern. He asked me to enroll for my master's degree at Northwestern, where he was going to be teaching again for the first time in many years. People have generally kind of associated him with Northwestern, but he taught there several times and was fired several times, each time without him being told.
What? Just change the locks or what?
Well, somebody once, he was talking to one of his students that he'd been working with. He said, well, of course, we'll work on that in the fall when you come back to school. And the student said, well, actually, Harvey Phillips is going to be teaching here in the fall. Whoa, is that right? No one told him.
What?
Because the school kept getting upset that Mr. Jacobs, who lived really far on the south side of Chicago, that he would never teach in Evanston. He would teach at his house on the south side. And the students had to go down there, and most of them loved it. It was an excursion. They got to have, a lesson with who I think would have been the greatest teacher of any subject that I've ever known, probably the best teacher of any subject that they'd ever known. And then they'd also get to go hear and play in the orchestra, and nobody really complained. But the administration didn't like the fact that they had a brand new building and he wasn't there to teach in it. So they just replaced him without calling him. This happened at least 3 times that I know of. But anyway, he was going to be teaching there again. And he asked me to come up. I was playing in civic already. And then I decided, okay, get my master's degree. That's easy. It's 1 year. And just a week before school started, he had a heart attack and ended up sending me to go out on tour with the Chicago Symphony. I ended up playing most of that year and most of the work for the next 7 years. And during that time, I would take lessons now and then, but whenever I'd ask him for a lesson, he'd say, "Oh, you're having a lesson every week with Eddie, Ed Kleinhammer. Just listen to Bud. He'll teach you a lesson. Just listen." And that was really cool because I was learning a lot from these guys, but I think he also was quite frail and not wanting to add to his teaching load at that point. So that's how it started. And then I became more like his associate. He always referred to me to other people, "This is my associate." And then we would, go out and have drinks and meals together. And then little by little, it became more like a friendship, but friendship with somebody who was as old as my grandparents. He was, at least two generations older than me. And at one point, I always called him Mr. Jacobs, and I usually try to refer to him as Mr. Jacobs still. And at one point he said, "Rex, call me Arnold." I tried to call him Arnold, and it just felt so uncomfortable. And so I just went back to calling him, Mr. Jacobs. Mm-hmm. But, we enjoyed lots of stories. The person that I knew, both as my teacher and as a man, is just a very different person than the person I read about. And people write books about him, and people write books about his teaching philosophy. And it seems like, wow, you're talking about somebody that I never met.
How so?
Well, they tend to think of him just as this kindly father figure, grandfather figure that's just all about song and wind, and just, don't think about this and just do this. And then, some think it's all about the physical application and the physiology, and that's not the point of his teaching at all. If you were a good player and you didn't have any trouble playing, it was pretty much about, well, for other people that were like that, it was pretty much about high standards and the psychology. How do you have to think to make this sound great? And for me, it was really about high standards, and that was about it. Just, no matter how beautifully I played something, it could in fact be better. And so he would push me, and he pushed me way more than anybody else I've ever known that was his student. And his normal teaching style, which I observed a lot watching lessons and watching him do master classes, he was so masterful for almost any kind of player at any time, because he had a great sense of empathy, and he could just tell. And now, as any good teacher, or any great teacher anyway, can tell from the way they approached their playing and the way they sounded, he would know immediately what's going on in their head. And so that's usually what he would work on to get them, thinking like they would have to think to really play beautifully. But for me, that happened so quickly because I kind of thought like that anyway. I'm very lucky that as a person, I've read quite a few times about what goes on in people's heads in their normal lives or in their professional lives. And I'm really lucky that I don't have voices in my head. I don't ever hear words when I'm kill. Like the only words that ever come up in my brain while I'm in a concert, they're just like really, really foul ideas about the conductor. In other words, there's like nothing else going on up there. If somebody could be like a tiny little man inside my brain while I'm playing, they'd probably think,
This one's not
A lot of
too
room
bright
up here.
This one's not home. But they would notice that in one corner, there's like the world's fanciest stereo system. And it's tuned into whatever I got to play. And it's playing what I'm playing at a better level than I am. And that's really all that's going on in my head. And so it didn't take him very much manipulation to just channel that to what we were doing. And after that, it was just basically him trying to get me to play like Bud Herseth. And that was the point of our lessons. And very different from Mr. Kindly Grandfather. It would be things like I would play 3 notes and he would say, do it again. I'd play those 3 notes, do it again for 45 minutes.
Wow.
Until like I'd get those 3 notes exactly the way he wanted, and he'd jump out of his chair and he'd be so excited, like that was the best he'd ever heard. And I'm like, haven't I been doing that version for 45 minutes? Different.
Wow.
It took me a long time to really hear the fine gradations that he was talking about. I just didn't hear it. And now I've researched it a bit, and my brain had not developed to the point where I could actually hear what he was talking about. And I think very few, maybe no young people playing our instruments in our octave really do hear that well.
It's like developing a palate, right? For a chef or an aspiring chef, it's about developing your palate.
Well, a little bit, except you've opened up another can of worms. That I've got kind of an unusual palate, and that's been there since I was a baby, to where certain foods cause me physical pain. And so like there's certain foods I just can't eat, but it makes wine a wonderful experience.
Silver lining.
There, but you then have to learn the associations if you're going to be a fine chef and things like that.
Right.
But for hearing, it's just not there until you're in your late 20s or early 30s. I didn't really hear the bottom octave on the tuba like I do now. I didn't really hear that until I was probably around 30, certainly late 20s. And now it sounds completely normal to me. But I can remember, probably everybody can remember, if you were ever around a grand piano as a child, and you go, of course, like any child, you're going to go hear the bottom A on the piano. And I can clearly remember that sounding like, dang, dang, dang. There was no pitch to it. It was just a dunk. And it could have been my grandmother's piano.
Don't blame your grandmother.
He didn't have a good piano. But as I got older, now even on a crappy piano, I touch that key, I hear it clear as day as an A, or something close to what an A could be. But that took a long time, and my early lessons with him were informing that part of my hearing and my brain, but it was mostly about, and I'll give you a little aside about his teaching style. Anytime, the most effective way to teach anybody is through imitation. So he would model things for everybody. And after about the second or third lesson, he never played for me again, ever. And years later, he was talking about, he'd been retired for 5 years, close to 10 years. And a guy came for a lesson from out of town, out of the country, actually. And that guy, I had dinner with him that night. He said, "Oh, I'm so thrilled. Mr. Jacobs played the whole time." And Mr. Jacobs had already told me at that point that he would never, ever pick up an instrument unless he knew he was going to play better than that student.
Huh.
He demonstrated to this guy. He hadn't played the tuba for 10 years.
Sitting there with the guy at dinner, like, well, I have good news and bad news for you.
Wasn't it beautiful? Because
Wow.
I'm sure it was. I mean, I heard him demonstrate a few things in master classes near the end of his life, and he hadn't lost this particular quality of sound. The most beautiful tuba sound, in fact, I've ever heard. Probably the most beautiful brass sound I've ever heard. I mean, he sounded so beautiful that near the end of his life, he was struggling in some areas of playing, but tone wasn't one of them. But accuracy was, and articulations were starting to trouble him a bit. And he would occasionally miss a note. And I'd hear him, like put a note in the cracks. And I'd think, God, what I wouldn't give to sound like that. Just his missed notes were the most beautiful thing you could imagine. Yes, gorgeous. So,
you alluded to, in effect, studying with Bud. I mean, by sitting in the neighborhood of him. What would you say he taught you, or what did you pick up there? Like what rubbed off on you?
I would say way more than I would even be able to identify. Most of it would have to do with like just how good something could possibly be. Long after you're pretty happy about something, there's still a few more levels to go. And those are the ones that take months, if not years. And I'll tell you a story that for me was really, really telling about that and what I learned from him. They're one of the little things. My very first time playing with the orchestra, I was playing, I think, really, really well. And Ed Kleinhammer and I hit it off like buddies right from the very first day. And after the first concert, which went really well, Ed Kleinhammer would always, and we played many hundreds of concerts together. And Ed every night would turn to me, and depending on how well I played, he'd say, and I don't know if you ever heard him speak, but he was a very big, strapping, strong, badass guy with a really high, squeaky voice. And he'd turn to me and say, Rex, tonight you can have 3 beers. If I played really well, he'd say, tonight you can have 4 beers. And once, the first time I ever played Pictures at an Exhibition with that orchestra, and playing the Beatles solo, it went really well. And afterwards he said, tonight you can have as many beers as you want.
Awesome.
But after that concert, we went out for a beer together, and he said, well, has Ursuf said anything to you? I said, no, we met, but he hasn't said anything. Next concert went really well. Has Bud said anything to you? No. This went on for weeks. Bud never said anything. And about maybe 2 months or so in to me playing with the orchestra, one concert, and I don't even now know what the piece was, but one concert, just as one of those special nights where everything was at a level above what I'd ever done before. It was just like, yep, this is the way I want this to go. It was really something special for me. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw Bud's foot do this.
That was just one back and forth shuffle. Yeah.
Yep, that was it. And for me, that was like 2,500 people in the audience standing up and yelling bravo and cheering rhythmically.
Right.
That's what it was like. And that was the most he ever gave anybody. It isn't like the way things have become, I think, really bastardized. Yeah. Now, if you're playing in an orchestra and somebody just makes their fucking part recognizable, people are shuffling their feet and tapping him on the knees. Like, fuck, man, that's his job. And for Herzog, he was listening to everybody all the time. And if he heard something that, yep, that's out of the norm, he would acknowledge it because he was listening all the time.
Mm. You know what you're reminding me of is playing in Sui for Mallory Thompson. Was that she expected excellence all the time, and then when it was a little bit better than usual, she would just give a little look. So yeah, which was a rewarding environment. So so
imagine that not happening until like months and months and months,
right?
And then you play something really special, and you just kind of get a little glance.
Yep.
And professional conductors don't even do that much.
Right.
The good.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I need to take a moment to thank Parker Mouthpieces for providing our hosting. Michael Parker, who is a former Rex Martin student. We'll talk about Michael in a second here. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist Model Tuba mouthpiece, which is so good you don't even have to practice. You'll sound like me. If you don't want to, then maybe you do need to practice on top of it. And the Lance LaDuke Model Euphonium mouthpiece. Which for whatever reason, that is not called the LaDance. The LaDance? The LaDance.
That would be pretty good. The LaDance model?
It is not called the Lance LaDuke model. It is not called the artist model. It's just the Lance LaDuke model. You can draw your own conclusions there.
Truth in advertising.
Find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So Michael was my college roommate, and we studied with Mr. Rex Martin at the same time. So there you go. Blast from the past.
So here I'd like to go in another direction and have you talk about another person. But you've mentioned Ed Livingston, and everyone that I know who studied with Ed Livingston would have walked on hot coals for Ed Livingston. There was something about him and his teaching and who he was as a person that impacted everybody who crossed his path. Could you talk about him and how his influence on you?
Yeah, I would not be, well, there's a few people in my past that I would not be where I am now without them. And he along with Arnold Jacobs are the two most influential. And influential to the part that I would assume that most of my students and most other tuba players that I know, they think of me, I think, as an Arnold Jacobs student. And I'm kind of a model of like what an Arnold Jacobs student could be. I don't think very many were very good, honestly. But I think he is the one that I'm most associated with because my teaching style is also really, really informed by him. But when I talk about my teacher to my students, I'm referring to Ed Livingston. And he was special. He was also a world-class, absolutely world-class bullshitter and storyteller and joke teller like no one I've ever known. I'm not good at telling stories. He was a virtuoso to the point that he had a certain teaching style that I, being fairly thick, never put two and two together. Where if we were ever playing an etude, and most of our lessons were just etudes, he was a master teacher, especially effective at taking somebody from a really low level to the 85th percentile. He could do that better than any teacher I've ever known. And Arnold Jacobs, on the other hand, is by far the best I've ever known at taking somebody from the 85th percentile up to the highest they possibly can go. So it was just a good fortune that those were my two primary teachers. But Ed had a technique. If there was ever a foreign word in an etude, he would ask me, what does this mean? And I would usually be able to find, some kind of a cognate in English. Sounds like this. Less tempo. It's probably like less tempo. Slow, right? But I just didn't think to look them up. And it never occurred to me, putting two and two together, that was his cue to tell a joke. Because at that point, the lesson was over. And I just thought he told too many stories. Of course, one of the things I tell my students, and I'm actually, I think, a very, very different teacher now than I was when you were studying with me, Andrew. But one of the things I tell my students is that on stage, do not accept responsibility for your actions whatsoever. You're just there to play as beautifully as you possibly can. If you ever make a mistake, don't apologize for it. Don't dwell on it. Just keep going. At most, blame it on the conductor, but otherwise, just keep going. And now I'm lost.
Ed Kleinhammer.
You're in Switzerland.
Oh, no, sorry. Ed Livingston. You're in Switzerland.
So I never accepted responsibility then. When it's like, I don't know the term, and he starts telling jokes, I didn't accept responsibility. I didn't know it was like that. But he was a wonderful man and truly a friend, a real friend. And in about 2.5 weeks, he would have had his birthday. And every year I'd call him on his birthday. He'd call me on my birthday. And it wouldn't even start with a hello, Rex. It would start with a dirty joke. Hilarious. Yeah, I really, really miss him. And if you're interested, I'll email you the eulogy that I delivered at his funeral, because he was a very special man in my life.
I'd love to read that.
Yeah, me too.
And
Yeah.
a skill that I do not have. In fact, I think very few teachers have. He was an exceptional musician and had been a great, great tuba player. But he had a skill that every one of his students just had so much confidence, they knew they were badass. And it wasn't him just blowing hot air up our ass. Like, he just made us confident in the way we progressed through our lessons. And I wish I had that skill. Arnold Jacobs did not have that skill.
45 minutes and then finally, on the 800.
You got it.
Yeah, that's, that story before made me think about, I don't remember how many years ago it was. I'm just getting to the point to the age where when I say it was 5 years ago, there's a chance it was 12 years ago. It's like when you're even in your late 30s, it's like the difference between 5 and 12 years is significant. And now it's just like, it had to have been more than 5 years. This was definitely pre-child. So there you go. Yeah. But I flew to Chicago to see you play the Vaughan Williams Concerto with Symphony 2. This was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago would be my guess.
Longer than that.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. See?
With my Besson.
Yep, that sounds right. And I don't I actually like the Vaughan Williams. I never need to hear it played by anyone ever again, basically for as long as I live. And I won't be upset if I do, but I will never seek it out ever again. But I saw that you were it's just a math issue. I've just seen it way too many times. But I saw that you were soloing with an orchestra, and I knew that there were, a limited number of times that I was going to be able to see that for the rest of my life. And so I was like, I'm going to go. And so I went, and I specifically remember it was the end of the second movement, and those last three notes, and then you played that last note, and it diminuendoed, and then at the very end you put like just the tastiest tiny little vibrato, like with the perfect release, exactly with the orchestra, perfectly in tune, like just everything was like, put the red light on, that's the one that we're taking. If I'm the producer and I'm like, we need one more for safety, but that's going on the album. And afterwards I told you that like those three notes were worth the entire, flight and hotel and everything else. And you said something to the effect of, you were appreciative, then you said something like, good, I worked on that for like 100 hours or whatever it was. So, but when you were talking about raising your standards, that specific instance reminded me where that doesn't just, I don't care, even if you're Rex Martin, that doesn't fall out of your bell accidentally on stage.
I did work on that a lot, because that's I would say, I also, like you, I've heard that piece a lot. And I've heard mostly student performances of it, of course, and I've heard some beautiful renditions of it, and I've heard some really awful ones. But the one, maybe of all of the places in the entire piece where it really people drop the ball, is right there.
Right.
And it's happened to me a couple of times in performances where it just doesn't really work the way I want. Mm-hmm. But I remember that performance because the conductor, who I really liked a lot, hard to believe, but I really liked that conductor. He asked me how long, in the rehearsals, how long do you want me to hold the last note? And I gave him this look of like, I don't care how long you hold that note. I'll hold it until you cut off. Because I don't care. I've practiced this. Right. And he held it a long time.
Right. Yeah.
really, really long note. And I'm thinking, how long was that look in my eyes? As long as you want, I don't care.
I friended him on MySpace before the performance, and I was like, I'll give you $20 if you hold that note for like 4 Mississippi count longer than makes sense. So yeah.
That voice in your head finally woke up on that note.
No, remember, the only words I ever hear are about conductors.
Yeah.
Fair.
I still share with students the advice that you give on it's Don Juan, right? That has like 2 notes that call for mute. Is that right? Is that the tone?
Till Orangespiegel.
Till, yes, Till. Thank you. That didn't quite seem right. There's like 2 notes that are 3 notes that are muted in Till, and his official advice is to before you get in there is to cross out the with mute in the part with pencil. And then he said, I remember your words so clearly, he said, if you happen to hit the lottery and this conductor is in the 0.01% of conductors who would notice that there was no mute there, and try to sound sincere when you call them Maestro, which is hard to do. Say, I'm so sorry, Maestro, it was crossed out of my part. I will have the mute here for the next rehearsal or whatever the next service is. And then that's the end of it. And he said, but not only, he's like, I'm instructing you to do this because if you start educating the conducting world on the fact that there's supposed to be a mute there, and that means the rest of us have to bring them, don't tell anybody you studied with me.
I have no love for tuba mutes, man. I've worked too many years on my tone quality to stick a fucking butt plug in the bell and fuck it up.
Or butt club.
Yeah.
It is more of a club than...
I just don't like mutes. And I know people who love mutes and they love experimenting with mutes. It's like, man, the very best mutes that I've played, I can make that same sound by just kind of screwing up what I'm doing in my face, in my mouth, and playing soft. And if I want to sound really muted, I can also screw up the intonation. But I've got a beautiful wooden mute that I bought in London that's just gorgeous, beautiful to look at. And it doesn't screw up the intonation, but it basically just makes it soft.
Yeah.
All it does is make it soft. And I've never once played a mute that effectively matches what the other brass have in theirs. It's like, man, you put a straight mute or a cup mute in a trumpet, that's a world of difference.
Yeah, it is.
You put a mute, a black mute and a silver mute and these ugly fucking mahogany. And I like mahogany when it's not a mute. You put those and they all sound like a bad tuba sound. Out of tune and soft. They don't sound brassy and cool, We don't have the equivalent that I've ever seen of a good Harmon mute. And it's not like I'm wanting people to experiment and say, hey, Rex, here's a cool Harmon mute. Cool wah-wah.
If you're
a guest wah-wah-er standing over you.
If you are a mute maker and you feel like you make a great mute, I need you to do me a favor, and I need you to all mail Mr. Martin one, please. It would be awesome if 9 tuba mutes showed up at his place in Switzerland. I'll track down his address for you if you'll help me to follow through in this. So he's just swimming in tuba mutes.
I would like to try a Schlipf mute from Austria. I've never played one of those, and everybody that I know that's played one has liked those. But I think they like them because they're in tune, not because they sound cool.
Right.
It sounds stupid, I'm sure.
See, you were on track for possibly getting one here. It's like I'd really like, but it probably sounds stupid anyway. And then you just kept talking.
Yeah. But it's like, I don't know. There are a few topics that can set me off, and one of them is
mutes. Who knew?
I love mutes in trumpets and trombones. Like horns, they generally have just 1 or 2. But there was an old. I used to not really like playing with him on jingle sessions, but there was an old trombonist that he would come to every recording session with the equivalent of a big blue IKEA bag full of trombone mutes. And he was old, and he had some chops, I think, at some point.
That's just not this point.
Not anymore, not since I knew him. And he always was asking the producers if they liked this sound more than this sound. These producers just
it's a diaper commercial, man. We don't care.
And they're thinking this is really expensive. This little 10-second conversation is very expensive. And almost without exception, he would say, would you like me to try it with the solo tone? Who brings a solo tone to a recording session? You own a solo tone, Lance?
Yeah, I've got one. My son had to have it for a some high school musical that they were doing. He's a senior in high school. He had to have it for something, and he used it for that, and it's sat in the IKEA bag since.
Yep, I've heard a solo tone dozens of times. Always with the same guy.
You'll be proud of me, Mr. Martin. I own a grand total of 0 tuba mutes. I literally do not own one. Every once in a while I need one, and like Mike Nickens, my dear friend who lives right up the road, which might as well be in Switzerland right now since we're not seeing any other humans. And also sometimes I borrow Parker has one of those travel mutes, which actually comes apart and it's got magnets and it folds into itself and you can put it in the bell for
black one. Is that the one from?
Yep. Yeah, maybe that is the company. Yeah, I didn't. I was like, wow, this is really handy, and it doesn't take up that much space. I was like, how much does this cost? And then he didn't even tell me. He was like, it's enough that you're not going to buy it. I was like, that's all I needed to know. That was the end of the conversation. Yep.
They're very expensive.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, you know what?
What?
The Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University is but they are a continuing sponsor of our show, so there must be some amount of pride there. So I hope.
As long as the check clears, the check is better than pride.
So if you're interested in finding out about the programs at Duquesne University and the Papert School of Music, you can click on the link in the show notes below to go to a page which will tell you all about all the faculty and groups that you can play with. And a very special thanks to Jim, the point is mute Nova, for making that possible.
I knew there was a way to tie the mute into there.
Yeah. I was going to go with no buts about it, join the club, but then I decided that
Jim gets a nickname every show. He gets a middle name. The best one so far is Jim Bubblebutt Nova.
Bubblebutt's definitely the winner.
Yeah. He's a friend. We're only mean to our friends. So yeah, and trumpet players and conductors and scratch the fact that I said we're only mean to our friends. That's like objectively false. I just heard those words coming out of my mouth, and I was like, that's not. Yeah.
People think I'm mean to everybody. I don't think I'm mean to anybody, but people think it's wrong. It wasn't Mean Rex. You haven't seen Mean Rex.
Uh-oh. The last thing that I want to hit here is Mike Roylance threw together a tuba hang, like an international tuba hang a few days ago, which was really therapeutic for me. And Sergio was on the call, and Jerome Stover, and there were people from all over, and Oystein, and yourself, and Pete Link, and I mean there was way too many people to mention half of them. You came on and talked about your approach to online lessons, and I thought it was really insightful, because you talked about how you've completely changed what you're even trying to do, rather than just doing as good a / poor job of what we used to do sitting next to each other. I thought it was really instructive. So can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. I've done a lot of online teaching over the years. The first ones were probably easily 15, maybe even 20 years ago or more. And I would say not completely, but nearly everything that I normally like to teach with any of my students, I cannot, in fact, teach like that online. It's not possible. I've tried to learn as much as I possibly can through my primary news source, which is, of course, Facebook. And I'd say there are dozens and dozens of tuba players and other brass players, none of whom I've ever heard of, that are offering free online lessons. And every teacher, I mean, without exception, they use the word great in their description of their online lessons. Online lessons are great. This is great. And the honest ones...
How do they spell it?
Oh, they're young, so it's GR and the number 8.
Oh, okay.
So
Bravo.
You just told us, you're just like, I get all my news from Facebook, which made you sound super old, and you're like, and the kids spelling things with numbers. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, please continue.
So, but the honest ones, after they say what a great experience this is, and they're loving it, and the students are loving it, they then go on to say, but it's nearly impossible to judge anything having to do with quality. And I'm thinking, okay. So in fact, I've done some master classes with internet too, right? So like they've got like these cables, like kind that go underneath the ocean, and they've got very little latency. They've got excellent video quality, and they still suck. They still suck because remember what I said, that I couldn't hear the difference at the start in my lessons with Arnold Jacobs? I was in the same room with my sound, and I couldn't hear the difference. And I can't hear that difference at all, even if I had great quality microphones, great electronics, an Internet 2 connection, great quality headphones on both sides. It would still be impossible to deal with that level of quality. Andrew, you're aware that I have another pet peeve, or maybe it's more of an obsession.
One? You had one other? Like
another.
Okay, fair enough.
Another is that I'm quite particular about rhythmic issues.
That's the most understated thing I've ever heard in my 44 and a half years on planet Earth. But yes, you are a little particular.
And to dwell my own head even further, I one of the greatest performing experiences I've had, they put together a Chicago jazz orchestra for just a few concerts a long, long time ago. And Phil Woods came and played with us, who was one of my idols, and I just loved his playing. And he came up to me at the end of one of the rehearsals, and he didn't know my name. He didn't know anything about me. He said, "Man, this is the first time in my life I've ever heard a tuba player that could swing." And I thought, wow.
There you go.
Phil Woods. So I'm thinking that's like my epitaph.
Sure.
Phil Woods said, but I actually saw a better one last week. I was at a cemetery here in Switzerland, and there's something I didn't know. A gravestone had the coolest thing, and I would actually like that on my gravestone. It was a staff with a bass clef and no notes.
Tacit. Permanently tacit.
You could read it like, yeah.
Wow.
It's still in but there's no notes left.
Wow.
That was really cool. Much better than others I've seen. There was the former president of the Musicians Union in Chicago, Charlie Guzzi. We became friends, and I had been college friends with his son, John. I've got this side business where I've had to play solos at so many funerals that it's really, really hard. It's hard to do. I've had to do it a half dozen times in my life. And you don't usually get a lot of lead time to practice the specific piece they want you to play, right? So anyway, I played. Then we went to the cemetery, and the tombstone had already been engraved with a tuba, which is really cool. And the numbskull that engraved it did a negative image of it. It was a left-handed tuba. But man, I don't want that on my grave. Anyway, I'm lost again. Fuck that.
Rhythmic, you occasionally have opinions about rhythmic variance.
And it is, thank you. It is completely impossible with internet latency to judge that. It's impossible to play together with the student. And so, there's so many limitations. You can't judge tone quality. You can't judge rhythmic things really, because you don't know, did they just screw up or did the internet just screw up? And with really fine shadings of dynamics and expression, you can't hear that. So, but they're great.
Other than that, how did you enjoy the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Yeah, exactly. So what I've done is for every one of my students, and this really, really works best with students who already know me. So with the students that I know that I'm working with on a weekly basis. So instead, I'm doing two specific things. One is that I'm assigning very specific scale patterns that need to be memorized, because for all the internet's problems for these distance learning, I can still hear if they fuck up their scales. So I can hear that. And I can tell immediately if they've practiced or they've not, right? Because even a dumb, untalented person can learn their scales. So it just keeps getting trickier and trickier and harder, and I have I keep track of what they have to do next. So that takes very little time. And the rest of it is I'm still trying to refine it to think, okay, what can we work on that will be really, really helpful for you musically and professionally that we don't normally do in lessons. And that's something you could call deep listening. So the way I hear music now, and I'll be 60 this summer, is really, really, really different than when I was a student. And when I was a student, I can remember Ed Livingston assigning me to go listen to Mahler's First Symphony. And I'd never heard any music of Mahler before. And I'm in my car, and I have a cassette of Mahler's First Symphony. And it had to have been like something cheap, or else I couldn't have afforded to buy it. Probably didn't even list the name of the orchestra on it. And I'm listening to it, and he talked about this tuba solo in this piece, right? So I'm listening to it. I've never heard a piece by Mahler. I don't know the solo. And then eventually the piece finishes, and I haven't heard a tuba solo. And the whole time I'm thinking, wow, I don't understand this music. I don't really hear what's going on. I don't hear many themes. I don't hear these melodies. What's happening? And one of these deep assignments I gave to one of my most advanced students was a very specific recording, one of my Desert Island discs, in fact, which is the Carlo Maria Giulini recording of Mahler's Ninth Symphony with the Chicago Symphony. And I had just listened to it last month, and I just love that piece. It's powerful enough that I rarely listen to it because it's just difficult. Difficult emotionally to put yourself through that. And Arnold Jacobs sounds he's a boss. In a way, a boss at a level that very few people will ever even get, because you never really notice it unless you're really listening carefully. And then you think, man, nobody does it better. That's just the way that goes. Whereas it's pretty clear that Dale Clevenger is like pretty much setting the standard for how a French horn can play Mahler's Ninth Symphony. And Bud Herseth is doing it in a way that you just think, oh my God. Yeah, end it. Nothing will ever be that good. But Jake is doing it in such a subtle way that you barely notice it. So I made this assignment. And I'm making these assignments so that my students start to hear things differently than they normally would. And I make very specific requests that they at first just listen to it. Just let it kind of wash over them. Don't really pay that much attention to it. And then you listen to it again, And one of them, I assigned a piece, and I said, and I bet, and you need to look at it with a score after 3 or 4 times. Look at it with the score. I said, I bet you won't even be able to pay attention to the tuba playing because you'll just keep looking up at the incredible oboe playing, because something else is going to catch your attention. And other things I'll say now, just really listen to the way the basses are playing this rhythmically. That if you put everybody together like this, it won't even sound like classical music, right? And so I'm making assignments like that as well. And eventually it will include other types of music that they're not normally listening to. I sent them a recording, I think, and if you want, I'll send it to you as well. I put it on Facebook a week or 2 ago, and I might stop uploading music that I think is life-changing and soul lifting, because nobody pays attention to it. And I must say, when other people put music up, I never listen to that either. It's number one, the quality of the recording is going to be awful. And number two, most of the time it's crap or it's fucking knuckleheads practicing. Like, I don't want to hear this shit. So I will put up things like the band, like listen to what Levon Helm is doing. This guy is one of the great musicians. Or a couple of weeks ago, I put a recording of one of my favorite musicians, Eric Clapton, playing Wonderful Tonight with Katie Bassoon as the backup singer. It's like, man, if people would just take the time to listen to what she's doing and then listen to what Eric Clapton does, his first notes on the guitar after, it sounds like she's still singing.
Right.
It's extraordinary.
Yep.
And any brass player, especially, low brass players, have a pretty heavy diet of Bourdonnier exercises. Listen to how Katie Bassoon sings and let that change your objective next time you play a vocalise. Because it's a level that human beings don't get to very much. And that's the kind of stuff that I'll be assigning my students.
Oh, that's great.
So it's not entertainment, it's work to actually listen. And the reward, or like this, I won't assign this Bob Dylan, this newest release, because I think they won't get any of the references. Right. The wrong generation.
You used to play me a lot of music. It was always as I got there, as I would walk in. Like, you introduced me to Tom Waits. You introduced me to some other artists, and which was always really I was thankful for. And you let me introduce you to some stuff as well. And it was never more than like 5 minutes, because we could have just done that, which would have been awesome and really worthwhile. But I also needed to improve a lot of my tuba playing. So, but yeah, that was, and I think I told this story on the podcast recently, but maybe I'm making that up. But I thought of you when I was, this was maybe a dozen years ago. We were in Japan. We were in Tokyo, and I went into a 7-Eleven at like 12:30 in the morning, like around the corner from our hotel. And I was absolutely hammered, and they were playing Tom Waits at this 7-Eleven in Tokyo. And it was
playing I'm Big in Japan, were they?
Right.
It was
I'm Big in Japan.
It was totally surreal that there's like, I froze, and there's like Tom Waits, and then I'm like in this, and I think 7-Elevens in Japan are like amusement parks to me, because it's like the most, I don't think I have a particularly bad sweet tooth, but I have a sweet tooth, and Japanese candy, like just like mass produced Japanese candy, is amazing. I mean, it's like, and they've got amazing iced coffee there that is like, you can buy like 8 different kinds of black iced coffee, not sweetened, like not just coffee that's cold. It's like, it's great.
And one of the biggest brands has the same face on it that cigarette rolling papers used to have when I was a kid.
Maybe that's why I like that iced coffee so much. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. So, all right. Well, we need to get you out of here, but we need to hear about. I'm sure that you are aware of the chop problems that our dear friend Jens has been experiencing. Jens Lindemann. And I love the fact that I bet your episode is going to get listened to by a lot of people who won't get the joke, but I won't spoil it for them. So Jens has been going through chop problems for many, many years now, and you're a wise human and pedagogue, and you have a way with words, we'll say. And so I'm just wondering if you can. I tried to make that sound sincere, and it backfired. But I'm wondering if you can give him some advice.
Most brass players, aside from horn players usually buy a mouthpiece, or like the mouthpiece comes with their horn when they're kids, and they use that until they retire. But trumpets and trombones, euphoniums a little bit, and tubas, we usually go through a period, usually when we're pretty young, of trying out as many mouthpieces as we possibly can. And that's really healthy, because you kind of find your own voice, and you find what helps you, what you don't need help with, and all this. But I noticed he put up a video online recently. It's really, really nice. I thought it was beautifully done. And he filmed, it must have been his house, a really nice looking place. And he starts off, and there's a mouthpiece on a step. And then he slowly moves the camera up, and there's a mouthpiece on another step and another one. And it takes you through the whole house. And there must be a couple hundred mouthpieces. So You can tell he's been experimenting a lot. But then at the end, it finally, you can tell. I figured it was Jens filming this, right? He's got a very steady hand, really professionally done, very high standards, just like him. And they get to the end, and it's not him. He's sitting on a sofa, and this beautiful progression through this beautiful house of this amazing collection of mouthpieces. It ends with a fucking advertisement for something. And I thought, man, no wonder your chops are so fucked up. It's sold out to the point that now you're hawking mouthpieces on fucking Facebook. Jesus, man.
I love that your advice was just a rant. There was no advice.
Build up, yeah.
It's like fortune
awesome.
cookies that are like, it's like the fortune cookie says today. Well, it does. Yeah, it just says like the sky is up. Yeah, and it's like no, you're not predicts if the sky's going to fall. That's a fortune. Like yeah. Anyway, I love it.
I think top from selling out.
Up there you go.
There you go.
So he needs to get back in touch with his, he needs to abandon his late stage capitalism tendencies, and he needs to come back towards helping others.
And then meanwhile, like, you've got some mouthpieces, experiment.
When you were talking about how it was like a steady, about how the camera work was high quality, everything in that marriage that's high quality is Jennifer. So I'm sure that she was the one that was filming. So yeah.
Norm Schweikert, who was a dear friend of mine and a dear colleague at Northwestern. You remember?
Yep, sure.
For many, many years. We were sitting in the audience in Pick Stager once listening to juries. And she was getting her doctorate at Northwestern, and I'd never met her before. I'd never seen her before in my life. And it was a different time, obviously, right, back then. She walks on stage as somebody, a brass player is like supposed to be the focus. And Jennifer walks across the stage, and filling the entire auditorium with his voice, Norm Schweikert says, "Oh, the lovely and talented Miss Snow."
Oh boy.
I don't think people would say that anymore.
No, they probably shouldn't. Boy, you talking,
It was wonderful.
Oh jeez. You talking about rhythm. Yeah, she has got time. It's just not just time, like groove. Unbelievable. I've played some pretty tricky stuff with her. Everything she plays flows. Everything. Like
that's cool.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, she's amazing.
I got a short little anecdote. I was playing a recital in a pretty nice festival, and the piano player, and you got to realize most of the time, if you're playing solos around the world, most of the time you're playing with a piano player you've never met before, right? So I've never met this guy. We go to the first rehearsal, and immediately I noticed this, like pulling his long hair out of his face.
Oh boy.
Right? It's like this, really pretty boy. And so we start playing, and it didn't matter what the piece was, what the style was, every phrase ended with a ritardando.
Oh boy.
Every phrase.
Oh boy.
Fast movement. Every phrase got a ritardando. I'm thinking, man, what do I do now?
We're going to be here until Tuesday.
Yeah. Or I'm going to just like do my normal technique.
Right.
Started stomping my foot. Like in a jug band.
There was I once was getting coached by Sam Palafian, and there was a section that some of my colleagues at the time kept on dragging during, and I guess I was like taking the opportunity with Sam in the room. I was like, he's going to validate my shit. Yeah, this is good. Like, because I got lots of problems with a tuba in my hands, and like time is not one of them. And I did it, and then we stopped, and I'm waiting for validation, and then Sam just says, Hitz. He goes, no rhythmic enforcement. Which was very well said. It was like, that's exactly what I was doing too. I was just doing the equivalent through my tuba of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3.
There was a very good brass ensemble that I was founding member of in Chicago. Stayed there for several years. It was a weird configuration because there were, I think, 3 trumpets, 2 horns, 2 trombones, and tuba. Yeah, that's what it was. And I couldn't figure out why every rehearsal and every performance, I was just exhausted by the end, like just tired. And one rehearsal, I just realized, man, it's like everybody's dragging. And so like I'm their own personal little Freddie Green, like picking the shit out of this beat to keep it going. And so in the middle of the piece, I just stopped. And the other 7 went, bam, 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 bam. Jesus. And one of the trombone players turns over to me and said, wow, this band's like a Mercedes. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's rear-wheel drive.
All right. On that note, we are going to have Mr. Martin hang on for the bonus episode here, which you can find out at patreon.com/thebrassjunkies. You can gain access to all of the previous bonus episodes, including a whole bunch of tuba players. Some who are even as articulate as Mr. Rex Martin here. Depending on the day, that's sometimes a high bar and sometimes not. He's now showing us Cash, so which I hope you watched that, man. Yeah, you're not supposed to be touching Cash right now. Now, don't rub it on your face. But anyway, I just went like a whole hour without thinking about the global pandemic that we're in the middle of, which is actually refreshing. So
wait, what?
Yeah, wait, what? Yeah. Lance is he keeps going to school, nobody's showing up. He's like, what? Did everybody quit? Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
And that is going to do it for another episode of The Brass Junkies. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/prayforjens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.